Yeah, how about you? You have a background in
Good evening, everyone. How are we all doing? Excellent. Thank you very much for asking. There are a few handouts over here. If anybody did not get one, I'm happy to run one over to you. Basically, a frequently asked questions document, and then a postcard on how you can communicate or the city communicates with you. So anybody need one of those items? No? All right. Well, welcome to our information session. This is the fourth and final in-person information session that we're doing. And we have one more virtual session next week, which will have a brief slide about that upcoming date later in the presentation. And that will be our third and final virtual information session. So we've done a total of 7, and this is number 6. Thank you so much for being here this evening to discuss the important topic for our community, that specifically being the referendum on the ballot on November 5th. My name is Chad Brecklin, and I serve as the Fitchburg City Administrator. In my role as Fitchburg City Administrator, I'm responsible for carrying out the day-to-day operations of the city services that are provided, as well as carrying out the policy direction from our mayor and common council. During our time today, we'll plan to walk through some slides through this presentation that provide an overview of the city's challenges, the referendum itself, and the impacts of a vote for or against. Following that presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. And just for point of reference, the presentation is taking generally about 25 minutes, and then we certainly will have plenty of time for any questions that folks may have. It is our hope that you walk away from today's discussion with answers to any questions that you might have, and that you feel as though you were informed as you head to cast your ballot in the voting booth in a couple of weeks. Prior to beginning the presentation, I want to introduce 3 of our elected officials who are here today. I'll start with Alder Gabriella Gerhardt. She's District 2. Alder Nicole Vaffadari, she is District 4. And Alder Donald Dantzler Jr., he is District 3. Is there anything you guys want to add at all before we start? No? All right. So what is this all about? The City of Fitchburg has identified a need for additional funding to increase staff capacity and invest in services to meet the increasing needs of our growing community. This is a topic we have been exploring as a community for many months, since actually June of 2023. There have been a number of public conversations at our Common Council meetings and our Committee of the Whole meetings in which our elected officials and staff have been assessing the options that are out there in order to meet the staff capacity needs that we have, as well as the needs for increasing certain services. There was an options assessment that was provided to our community via our website earlier this spring, and we also sent out a survey to all residential property addresses in the city as well, right around February. About 15,000 of those surveys were sent out, and a little over 2,000 of them were returned. And those survey responses, as we'll probably get to through the presentation and or through the question and answer portion of the program this evening, were used to help guide the decision making here that we're talking about today. As we've shared all along the way since we've been starting this conversation, with the City of Fitchburg community growing, the demand for city services, including public safety and other services like infrastructure, parks maintenance, library, pick your city service, all of those needs have increased. The chart that I have in front of you is one way to measure the increase that we've seen in the city. Between 2013 and 2023, Fitchburg's population has grown nearly 34%. That is represented by the green line on the top of that graph there. And for context, our growth has far outpaced the growth within the state of Wisconsin as a whole. During that same time period, the overall growth in population in the state of Wisconsin was about 3%. So you can see we're trending 10 times more than the growth of the entire state as a whole here in Fitchburg. Also during that period of time, you'll note that in the blue line in this graph, city staffing has increased approximately 19%. So there is a notable difference between the amount city staff has increased in relation to our population, and therefore creating a lot of the staff capacity concerns leading to the referendum that we're talking about. First, we'll start looking at our public safety services. Between 2013 and 2022, calls for our Fitchburg Fire Department have increased by nearly 40%. That is represented by the green line on this graph. The blue line, which we'll talk about here in the next slide a bit more, is representative of the staffing levels of the Fitchburg Fire Department. Largely that decrease is driven by a decline in the number of paid on-call part-time firefighters. Years ago, our community had a fully volunteer fire department, and over time that has transitioned to include, I think, approximately 18 full-time employees currently, and a pool of paid on-call or part-time firefighters to help supplement the calls for service. So as these number of calls for service have increased, as I mentioned, the part-time paid on-call staffing has declined, which has also led in some cases to the average response time being increased. And longer response times can also be attributed to the fact that there are times when our fire engines are unavailable due to being on other calls, and that requires mutual aid to come in from another community. And as you can imagine, when another fire department responds from outside Fitchburg, it's certainly going to take longer to arrive than an engine from within our community. So additional funding is also needed when we're talking about our fire department to increase our base wages for those part-time firefighter positions. They are currently paid a base wage of $12 an hour. They can earn a higher hourly rate based upon the number of trainings and certifications they complete, as well as the length of time that they stay and serve with the fire department. What we'd like to do is increase that base wage to $15 an hour to be more competitive with other part-time employment opportunities that exist in our community, and to ideally recruit new part-time firefighting staff, as well as retain existing part-time firefighting staff. Along the same lines, we've also seen an increase in calls for service in our police department. On this slide, you can see between 2013 and 2022, the city saw a 22.6% increase in the number of calls for police services. With our staffing needs, it is continuing to be more challenging to meet the growing demand for public safety needs, both in our police and our fire departments. With the challenges in mind of meeting the call for service demand, our police department did recently apply for a grant from the United States Department of Justice. They were selected to receive this grant, and this grant would fund 3 police officer positions to be added to our police department, and this grant funding would cover 1/3 of the cost to add these 3 police officers, and it would cover a 3-year period. Obviously, the City of Fitchburg has to cover the other 2/3 cost as it relates to these 3 police officer positions, and we would be required to keep these positions for the 4th year after the first 3 years of the grant in order to fully accept the grant. Without the additional funding that is asked for in this referendum, the City of Fitchburg and its police department is likely going to need to turn down this grant funding and will not be able to offset the cost of 3 police officer positions with this federal funding. Sticking with our public safety, the City of Fitchburg has had space needs at its City Hall. There was a space needs analysis done 10 years ago that indicated that our police department was already out of space at that point of time, and that if the police department were to vacate their space, other city departments could move into their existing space, thereby meeting the space needs that exist currently in the rest of City Hall. So our Common Council has been planning to address those space needs. There is a new police services building that is planned for construction. It's currently in the schematic design phase, and it's estimated to begin construction next year and be completed in the first quarter of 2027. And the funding that is requested as part of this referendum would allow the city to operate this police services building annually. There's funding within this referendum that would allow the city to hire a full-time building maintenance person who would be responsible for maintaining this facility, keeping things neat, orderly, and maintained. And then there would also be the ability, obviously, to pay any of the annual operating expenses associated with utilities and those sorts of things. And then we would also use a portion of the funding to build a small reserve that would allow the city to ultimately repair or replace mechanical systems within the building whenever that time is necessary. As you all have probably experienced, as our community has grown, there has certainly been an increase in traffic, congestion, and also needs for people to get places within the city through transit services. There is a request as part of this referendum for additional transit funding that would allow improvements to our existing transit system. Namely, we would look to increase service on our routes 65 and 75. Both of those routes, generally speaking, serve the east and west parts of our city along McKee Road and East Sherrill Parkway, and then venturing to the north in one way, shape, or form. Those routes both currently operate only Monday through Friday during peak morning and peak afternoon hours. It does not have all-day or full-day service on those two routes. So we would be looking to increase the service on both of those routes to have service every day of the week, with the service being every 60 minutes, Monday through Friday during the daytime, and then it would drop to every 90 minutes in the evenings and weekends. And one of the things that would come with these improvements to the routes 65 and 75 is service we don't have currently, which is called paratransit service. There are a number of folks in our community who would rely on paratransit services if they are available. And if these two routes were enhanced and improved, paratransit service would be included, and that would cover anyone who resides within 3/4 of a mile on either side of those particular routes. And one of the things that the improvements in transit are designed to do is improve our access between residential areas, commercial centers, and shopping areas, and City Hall, library, senior center area. Right now, we do not have transit connections with any regularity to our senior center or library in particular, and it is difficult for folks who might live in the northwest portion of our community to work to the center, via transit of our community and off to the northeast and vice versa. The City of Fitchburg has been a careful steward of our budget. We try to do all that we can to make the most out of the tax dollars that are provided to us by you, our residents and taxpayers. One example that I can use on the ways in which our Common Council and city staff have tried to be very cognizant and a careful steward of our finances is we recently had a rating by Moody's Investors earlier this year. Anytime the city borrows money for road projects or city facilities or those sorts of things, Moody's Investors comes in, they assess the city's finances to determine what our rating will be, and then obviously whenever we go out to borrow that money, those who are interested in providing that money will base our rate on what our bond rating is and what our propensity to pay that back is. We are very pleased to learn, after a number of years of striving to reach this level, we have received Moody's highest rating that they provide to municipal governments. That is a AAA rating, and we are currently one of 6 municipalities in the state of Wisconsin that they have assigned their highest rating to. So that has been something that our Common Council in particular and city staff have been working towards for the better part of 25 years. Because about 25 years ago, our bond rating was, I'm told, nearly junk status based upon what the city's finances were at that point in time. So there's definitely been a commitment made by staff and current and past Common Councils to put us in a much better position. And what I will say, what we did learn after that first round of borrowing that we had done after that bond rating is we were told by our public finance advisors that they estimated that we were able to save about $300,000 in interest costs by having our bond level rated a step higher than it had been previously. So getting back to the slide here a bit more, at this point, the needs of our community and the costs associated with addressing those needs have outpaced our current funding capacity, and additional dollars are needed in order to hire public safety and administrative personnel and address growing operating costs and invest in transit. Costs have increased due to factors including the cost to recruit and retain our professional, service-oriented team, inflationary pressures on equipment, the cost of supplies, goods, services, and other materials, and other operating expenses with maintaining the high level of services that we believe our community appreciates. To address these challenges, the City of Fitchburg has placed a referendum on the ballot for November 5th. The referendum will ask Fitchburg voters whether or not they approve or support a $3,593,000 increase in the property tax levy going forward to fund 5 sworn police positions, 6 firefighters, 3 city staff positions, which specifically are a communications director, a human resources generalist, and a finance manager, the police services building operating costs, improvements to public transit, and other city operating costs. And I do want to point out before we move on to this slide, there has been some confusion. We'll do questions at the end. Please flag them, and I'll come to you first. There has been some confusion that school districts have the ability to, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying, escalating their referendum amounts. They could do a referendum that can increase in up to 4 consecutive years, of course, with voter approval. Our situation is a little different. Municipalities are not allowed to do that. We can only request an amount that can be increased after that referendum. So for the purposes of this referendum, it is a one-time increase of approximately $3.6 million. It does carry on every year thereafter, but it does not increase an additional $3.6 million every year thereafter.
What does that mean?
What that means is that the city can have a budget of, let's say, $20 million. They then could have a budget of $23.6 million, and that budget would stay at $23.6 million absent other changes that would be allowed by state law. So we'll get a little bit deeper into that, and I'll try to explain that through the rest of the presentation. So you may be asking, why do we have to go to referendum in order to fund the solutions that we've identified? First and foremost, I want to stress that the referendum is not due to a financial gap. We are not trying to close a budgetary gap in order to continue to maintain city operations at this point in time. This referendum is largely to add staff capacity and then pay for other operating costs, which we've talked about and will continue to talk about throughout this presentation. The city's ability to respond to changes in the demand for its services is restricted by state legislation. Specifically, state law limits our property tax levy increases primarily to the percent increase in our equalized value from net new construction. I'll do a little bit deeper dive into that because it can be a little bit complicated. The allowable increases based on net new construction alone are insufficient to meet the growing needs of our community. And in order to exceed our state-imposed levy limits, a referendum is required to do that. So you probably, as we talked about with you seeing increased traffic, you've probably seen development happening in our community, and you may be having a question of, well, where's all the tax revenue associated with that development going? That's a very fair question. And how state levy limits work is our property tax levy can only increase based upon net new construction. So when you look at all of our property here in Fitchburg and what it's valued at on January 1, say, of 2023, and whatever the change in that equalized value is on January 1 of 2024, that equates to the difference and creates, whatever that difference is, creates our net new construction. So in simple terms, for my math, if we had 100, let's say all of our properties valued $100, just for ease of me being able to explain this, and we had a 3% increase in net new construction, our levy would allow us to go to $103. So what that means is, in this particular situation, much like you and your own financial budgets, the city also is experiencing inflationary pressures as it provides its services. Our budget is about 65-70% people. It costs more, obviously, to retain and recruit people. And roads, police cars, fire trucks, parks, lawnmowers, all of those things cost more money to provide those services as well. We recognize, again, that we're not alone in feeling this pinch. We know that our residents and taxpayers are as well. The challenge that we see is if we don't grow, if we have zero growth, that $100 stays at $100. And that probably means, or likely means, that there is a reduction in staff and a reduction in the services that are being provided as time goes on. If we do grow, in the case of our operating budget for next year, our 2025 operating budget, we were allowed approximately 2.9% increase in our levy due to net new construction. That 2.9% increase, or roughly 3%, equates to about $175 million in net new construction. That's what our values, our property values changed from January 1 of one year to January 1 the following year. $175 million is a lot of homes and a lot of other construction to equate to $175 million that gets us a 3% change in our levy. That 3% change moving into next year's 2025 operating budget equated to about $750,000. A 1% cost of living adjustment for all city staff equates to just over $200,000. Right now in the mayor's proposed operating budget for non-represented, i.e. non-union, non-police, and fire staff, there's a 2% cost of living adjustment being provided in that budget. So there's about $400,000 of the $750,000 that the city was allowed to increase its levy. As you can imagine, the other $350,000 then goes to any increases in other costs associated with people, i.e. benefits, health, retirement, or otherwise, and the available increase goes to trying to maintain the existing services at the level that we have. You can imagine our roads aren't getting any cheaper to plow or repair. Our parks obviously aren't getting any cheaper to replace equipment within those parks or maintain that equipment. So the point being is that the growth does allow for us to do some things as far as maintaining existing services, but no growth would mean we are cutting services and cutting people. Why now? Well, you've probably seen between school districts and other municipalities, there are referendums showing up on ballots quite regularly and frequently. Growing needs and increasing expenses have outpaced the city's ability to hire staff and make investments to fund the solutions that are needed. In order to invest in staffing and fund growing operating costs necessary to maintain and in some cases improve existing services, additional funding is now required. So here's the question that you will see on the ballot if you haven't seen your ballot yet. And in a couple of seconds here, I'll give you an opportunity to read it. I won't bore you by reading it myself. But I do want to point out as you're reading this question that this is language that the Wisconsin Department of Revenue requires us to utilize. We don't have any authority but basically to fill in the blanks on this question. It does at times become easily confusing as you read this question, and I just want to stress that it's not written in that way to try to deliberately confuse anyone. This is the format that we have to use. We use a public finance advising company to write this question. They work with the Department of Revenue, and the Department of Revenue has to approve the question before it can be placed on the ballot. So take a couple moments here and go ahead and read the question. Yep, we'll get there. I got you. Everybody had a chance to read the question? Okay. So here's a preview of where the referendum question will be placed on the ballots. The ballot on the left-hand side is for those who live outside or not in the Madison Metropolitan School District. So if you live in the Oregon or Verona School District, the ballot on the left is the ballot that you will see. The referendum question is on the second page of the ballot. On the back side, you need to flip it over. and you'll find it in the upper left-hand corner. The ballot on the right-hand side is for those who reside in the Madison Metropolitan School District. As you may be aware, the Madison Metropolitan School District has 2 referenda questions on the ballot, and you can see again in this particular case, the Fitchburg referendum question is also on the second page or on the back side. You need to flip it over, and then in the upper left-hand corner is where you will find the Fitchburg question specifically. So if the referendum is approved, the city would be able to institute that one-time permanent nearly $3.6 million increase to the property tax levy, beginning with property tax bills issued this coming December. And this translates to a property tax impact of just over $65 per $100,000 in assessed property value, and the impact to a median valued Fitchburg single-family home, which is currently $457,800. The estimated impact is to be just under $300 annually and just under $25 per month. We have added a tax calculator to the city's website. I would encourage anybody who would be curious as to know what their estimated tax increase as a direct result of a past referendum might be. I encourage you to go to the city's website. And you can use this tax calculator. You enter in the current assessed value of your home, and then that will help to calculate what the estimated increase would be for your particular property. So if the referendum is approved again, as you know, people provide the services that we all seek to have in our community. And the city's ability to address those priorities has been limited by our staffing capacity. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the city's annual budget is about 2/3 the cost of people to provide those services. We know that there's a staff capacity issue. For anyone who's been familiar with city government for any length of time and or worked for the city, it's been evident of a capacity issue. And the city did have an operational and organizational study done by Baker Tilly last year. And we also, as part of this process, required our department heads to assess their current and estimated future staffing needs over the next several years. Between those combined efforts, the efforts uncovered a need for more than 50 additional city staff members in the next coming years. The Common Council and city staff know it's not feasible to come to our taxpayers and ask for more than 50 people. In fact, it would be quite some time, if ever, before all 50 positions are even hired in this city. It's not a realistic thing for us to be looking at in the short term, certainly. Our Common Council and city staff looked at the studies that were done, talked with our department heads, and what we've placed on the referendum before you, or what has been placed on the referendum before you, are the 14 positions that were identified as the highest need throughout this process. If approved, the city will have the funding necessary to address the increased demand for our public safety services, including the 5 sworn police positions, which would include the 3 police officers that would be partially grant funded that we talked about earlier, 1 lieutenant and 1 sergeant. We'd also hire 6 firefighters with an approved referendum. The additional staffing in our police department will allow them to assign a full array, including supervisory and command staff, to fully cover its 3rd shift and cover peak service hours. It will ensure the city's ability to accept the federal grant funding that they have been awarded, and it will also allow the police department to do more community-oriented policing by instituting or bringing back additional neighborhood-based police officers. The 6 additional full-time firefighting positions will help maintain and improve our ability to respond to emergencies in a timely manner and address staffing vacancies caused by decreasing volunteer or part-time availability, and importantly, will assist in reducing overtime and over-reliance on our existing career staff and thereby improving our staffing reliability levels. We staff 2 engines. Obviously, the city is geographically spread out at 35 square miles. We staff 2 engines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, one on the east side of the city and one on the west side of the city. Those fire engines are staffed with 4 firefighters each, and it is, I think, roughly around 2,500 hours a year. Actually, my math probably isn't real good there, on the overall hours of staffing that are required when you start talking about 24/7, 365 with 8 people. But the bottom line is what these 6 full-time firefighter positions will allow us to do is cover 75% of those annual hours that are necessary with full-time career firefighters. Currently, less than 50% of those hours are covered by full-time career staff. And we have made strides in that over the last couple of years in our budget. Some staff has been added in our fire department in the last 3 budgets. I think in total 4 fire department employees have been added. And we've been able to improve that ratio from right around 30% of the hours being covered by full-time staff to, again, still under 50, but we've probably shaved about 15% off of that with the addition of some staff over the last several years. The funding also in this referendum, as I mentioned earlier, will allow us to increase the base hourly rate for our part-time firefighters from $12 an hour to $15 an hour. That $12 an hour is an increase from $9 an hour that was previously paid to those part-time employees just last year. That rate was just increased to $12 this year. Again, we're hoping that the increase in the base pay will help us to recruit additional part-time staff and retain the existing staff that we do have. When we look at the 3 other positions that are on this referendum, specifically the communications director, the human resources generalist, and the finance manager, those positions will be used to, in the case of communications, help improve our communication, outreach, and overall transparency with our community. The human resources position will be used to help aid our recruitment and retention efforts, and also aid in the day-to-day operations of human resources functions in the city. The city has approximately 200 full-time employees right now, and we have 3 human resources employees. So you can imagine with 200 full-time and about 50 to 75 part-time and limited-term employees, our human resources department certainly can use some additional capacity as well. And then as it relates to the finance manager position, that will be utilized to help supplement our existing finance department. Absent a position that was added, I think, 2 years ago in the budget in the finance department, that department had not seen an increase in its staff absent a part-time position since the late 1990s. And this particular position, in addition to helping support our finance department, will also support our public works department. Right now we have a number of staff in our public works department between our street supervisor, our parks maintenance supervisor, our utility supervisor, and our engineers who are expected to do finance-related tasks because our finance department simply doesn't have capacity to support them fully at this point in time. So we do believe it's a more efficient use of everyone's time and resources to allow the public works crew and engineers to focus on their expertise, infrastructure projects, maintaining our streets and parks, and not being so dependent to be relied on to process some of our finance-related tasks. The city, as it relates to the referendum, and I guess before I go there, I'll break this down a little bit. You can see about 52% of the referendum is for the public safety staff I had mentioned, and 11% of the referendum is used for those 3 positions I just mentioned. So that's the total of 14 positions that would be added. The other remaining amount of the referendum, the police department building operating costs, which again, part of that would be used to hire a full-time building maintenance custodian position, is listed there at approximately $467,000 or 14% of the referendum. At transit is $350,000 of the referendum is identified for transit, or about 10%. And just as a reminder, those transit dollars would be used to invest in routes 65 and 75 to improve the service there from peak hours on weekdays only to all-day service on the weekdays and 90-minute service evenings and weekends. We would get the mentioned paratransit service that we do not have, which would allow those who qualify for paratransit service living within 3/4 of a mile of those two routes to be able to get that. And it would certainly improve access to job centers, residential areas, and the City Hall, library, and senior center. And then finally, the last portion of this referendum is about $475,000 or 13%. That's the other operating costs. And those costs or that dollar amount is largely to be reserved for future personnel increases in cost for existing staff. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, a 1% cost of living adjustment as it stands currently for the 200 full-time employees in the city is about $200,000. So that $475,000 is likely to be consumed in the very near future, just simply providing cost of living adjustments for city staff, existing city staff. So if the referendum is rejected by a majority of voters, the City of Fitchburg will need to make difficult decisions on how to address the growing needs for public safety, parks, street maintenance, and other city services, as well as growing challenges related to recruitment and retention of existing staff. The result will, in the short term, require the city to maintain its current services and current staffing levels. Absent some sort of change that would allow the city to increase its revenue, whether through outside sources but besides property tax levy, which we currently do not have, but absent any sort of legislative changes or other situations that would allow that, if everything stays as it is now, in the very near future, the Common Council and city staff will have to determine how best to provide the services with the property tax levy it can raise. That is likely to mean there will be cuts to services or reductions in services and reductions in staffing levels. Without the referendum, we will not be able to hire the additional staff as outlined. As you can see, that cost of the staff was, roughly, $2.5 million or so. And you can see with even a great growth year of 3%, that's only about $750,000. And that $750,000 is oftentimes, if not all the time, utilized just to maintain existing city services. So when we look at information sessions, we are at our second to last one that I mentioned, and then we have our virtual one next Monday, October 28th at 6 p.m. You can simply go to our website if you'd like to watch the presentation and participate virtually. We'll do the same presentation and then have another question and answer session. And all of these presentations that we have done have been recorded, and they are available for streaming on the city's website. You can go and watch them at any time you want that's most convenient to you. And if you happen to see the presentation, feel free to fast forward. Nobody should have to endure listening to me twice. At any given time, Patrick signed up for a second session here and has had to endure listening to me a couple of times, but you can fast forward through that and just cut right to the question and answer session. So in summary, the referendum will ask Fitchburg voters whether or not they support a nearly $3.6 million increase in the property tax levy going forward to fund 5 police positions, which are specifically 3 police officers, 1 sergeant, and 1 lieutenant. The funding in this grant will allow the city to accept $375,000, or about 1/3 of the cost of those 3 police officers, in grant funding from the federal government. It will increase our community-oriented policing efforts through additional neighborhood-based police officers, and it will enhance our supervisory coverage during peak times. 6 firefighters are included in this referendum. The benefits of the 6 firefighters and a past referendum include increasing our base pay rate to $15 an hour for our part-time firefighters, reducing our current dependency on our part-time staff to cover those engines we talked about, as well as our existing staff and overtime from the existing staff to cover those engine hours. And again, those hours would transition from less than 50% currently being covered by our full-time staff to approximately 75% of those hours covered. The 3 non-public safety positions, specifically the communications director, human resources generalist, and finance manager, would allow the city to improve its communications, outreach, and transparency with its residents and other city stakeholders. It would help recruit and retain staff and provide additional capacity on the day-to-day operations of our human resources functions. And namely, it would allow our public works and engineering staff to spend more time on public works and engineering-related tasks instead of finance-related functions. The ongoing police department facility operating costs will allow us to hire a full-time building maintenance custodian. It will fund the operational costs for that building, namely the annual utilities and maintenance, and build a modest reserve for future building mechanical systems repair and replacements. Improvement to the transit and paratransit systems, we've talked about that. Enhancements to Route 65 and 75 to move it from weekday peak hour only to day, evening, weekend, and weekday service, and also bringing paratransit service to other areas of our community. And then the other city operating cost is reserved for future existing personnel cost increases. And as a reminder, this referendum would create a property tax impact of just over $65 per $100,000 of assessed value. And the impact to a median Fitchburg single-family home currently assessed at $457,800 is estimated to be just under $300 a year and just under $25 per month. And then you can see finally in the pie chart here on the right hand of the screen, about 2/3 of this referendum is being used to fund additional public safety capacity through new staff and the public services or police services building. The non-public safety personnel is about 11%. The other operating costs that are reserved for existing personnel cost increases is at 13%, and transit is at 10%. Make sure, please, that you head to the polls on November 5th to vote on this referendum question. Our polling locations on November 5th will be open from 7 a.m. and they'll close at 8 p.m. And as a reminder, voters are required to show an acceptable form of ID in order to vote. Additionally, if you would like to vote in-person absentee, that is beginning tomorrow at City Hall. I encourage you to go ahead and check our city website for the hours in which you can vote in-person absentee. That'll actually be taking place in the Fitchburg room at our community center as well. But we'll have some signage up as you come in to help guide folks to where the in-person absentee voting is taking place. Any additional voting information, including the hours I mentioned, or how to request a ballot, can be found at the city's website or myvotewi.gov. So prior to questions, I do want to introduce Mayor Radafrada has arrived as well. Is there anything you wanted to say at all, Mayor?
No, I want to say thank you for coming.
Yep, I'll get you the mic here. There you go.
So I want to say thank you for coming tonight to get to know a little bit more about the referendum. There is a lot of misinformation in social media about the referendum, and I think this is your opportunity for you to ask questions and why we are doing this. I know that we started this process, I don't know, you mentioned, we started this process like in June of 2023 with the Common Council to look for revenue sources to absorb the growth of the city. At the end of the day, the council decided to go with a referendum. But I want to let you know that we didn't take this lightly. We took a lot of deliberation, discussion. I know I understand that no one wants to pay more taxes, but I think what we're asking is something like, it's almost $25 per month to help us to move the city forward and absorb the growth. We live in a great city that we're growing, and I know with some of the growth bring a lot of challenges. But I want to say thank you, and I am here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. There's anything you guys wanted to add? No? Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started with the question and answer. I'll come to you first. We'll let everyone who has a question ask their first question and work our way through the room until everyone has had their first question answered. And then if you have more than one question, we'll work our way back around through the room as well. So I'll start with you first.
All right, now, either I'm an idiot or I'm not understanding.
Yeah.
You're telling me that if you put that first question, that first thing that you're gonna put on the poll up, it says right at the bottom that you're going to, well, here, I've got it, right here. It says, and I'll quote, and on an ongoing basis include the increase of $3,593,000 for each fiscal year going forward. Now, to me, that means you're going to charge everybody $3 million, whatever it is, on an ongoing basis every single year.
Is that your question?
No.
Okay.
But
Is
it is a question,
Okay.
yes.
All right. I just want to make sure I.
Because if somebody isn't here listening to you say, no, that's not true, then they're going to read this and say, oh, you know, is that true? Isn't it true?
So it is a one-time increase of $3.6 million that is permanent. It goes on and on every year.
Every year.
Yes, that is correct.
We get charged $3 million.
If the city has a $30 million budget, it would be $33.6 million every year moving forward.
When we prepare next year budget, the $3 million, 3.5 is going to be already included there.
Next question? Go ahead.
I saw a couple things that need clarification. If you could go back at least one or two. I want to point out what I'm looking at. Go back, stop. Okay, that one. I want to point out something here. 5 sworn police positions, 6 firefighters. Now go to the referendum question. Now, you had mentioned back at the beginning, and I think I figured out the answer to part of this. Back at the very beginning, you were talking about 3 police officers, but then towards the end, you were saying that it's 3 police officers plus 1 lieutenant plus 1 sergeant, I think it was? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the way I've understood this from the past, 1 authorized police position takes 5 officers because you need an officer on each of 3 shifts, and you need an officer for weekends, however that works out, and an officer for when they're, well, to cover when the others are off on training, vacation, sick time, anything like that. So this has been used interchangeably, and I don't know if this is talking about the same thing, talking about, and really it applies to the fire department too, because it says 6 firefighters. Is 1 position equal to 1 police officer, or does 1 position mean 5 officers? And on the question right there, it says, it very clearly says 5 police positions, 6 fire positions. Just based on the police, does 1 position mean 5, which means 5 times 5 is 25 officers?
No, that does not mean that. What you're referring to is if we were to staff one officer on 1 shift, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that would take about 5 police officers to provide 1 officer on on each of the shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to account for the things you mentioned.
That's an authorized position, isn't it?
No, that's a role. That's a role. A position for the city is the actual people. So what we'd be looking at is, so for instance, the police department, you know, they may have minimum staffing levels that are 4 people on each shift, right? So that's just 4 people. They're not looking at, there's nothing hidden in here in so much as that this really means 25 and this really means 30. No, it means we're going to hire 5 new people in the police department, 3 police officers, which to your point, does not staff 1 officer in a squad car 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it's not 5 of them. But there would be 3 police officers, 1 sergeant, and 1 lieutenant. Those are the 5.
Then what is this authorized position thing that I've heard in the past, where 1 position means 5 officers? Is there a different term for that?
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but how it works in police staffing is they call that the shift relief factor.
The what?
Shift relief factor.
Okay.
So basically, that's the number of people you need to staff a shift. So if you want, for instance, 4 officers to be on any given shift, you need, and the shift relief factor is 5, like you've mentioned, you need 20 police officers to make that shift. Have 4 officers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay, so the way this is being used right here, police officer and police position is the same thing. One position, one officer means one job, one person.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. Same with the fire department and same with the city staff positions.
Why don't
Yeah.
city staff is not 24 hours.
Right.
Police and fire.
Right. Yep. 5 people in the police department, 6 people in the fire department.
Okay.
That's what it means. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right, under your frequently asked questions, you show 39.8% calls an increase for fire department. That's over 10 years. I don't have them calculated with me, but that's only about 4% a year, which is barely above inflation. So my question has to do with, and I know fire departments do more than put out fires, but how many fires have they actually put out in the last 2 to 3 years in Fitchburg versus how many times have they had to go to existing communities? Because I know they do good work, but sometimes I think they're just there day after day, just sitting in there waiting for something to happen.
So our fire department does more than just fight fires. I don't have the numbers of how many fires they've responded to in the last couple of years. That information I don't have readily available. But they respond to many other things like fire alarms, smoke alarms, both at residential properties as well as commercial properties. They respond to car accidents. They respond to medical calls and assist our EMS on those calls. And they also do prevention and inspection as well. So there's a myriad of different duties that our fire department does well over and above just simply responding to fires that happen. You can probably imagine that the prevention and inspection measures ideally are designed to mitigate the need for fire departments to respond to actual fires themselves. So there's clearly, more efforts on the preventative side and ensuring compliance with fire code with the inspection side are ideally not creating situations where they're having to respond to many fires. Next question. Yep.
You mentioned earlier, maybe it was the past year, tax levy increase allowed of 2.9%. And on the screen here, I see 3.847%. So the 2.9 was from some time ago, but this is the current one? Okay, so
Go ahead.
that's the prelude. And that's based on the net new construction over 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And is net new construction like assessed value?
Yes.
Okay, so my assessment every year goes up way more than 3.8%. And a lot of people that I talk to, we have 5% increases, 10% increases. Why is that so low compared to
Right.
homeowner properties being assessed at, reassessed at greater and greater and greater percentages than that?
Right. I'll answer your first question here in regards to why is the 3.8% different than the 2.9. 2.9 is the biggest factor of what we can increase our property tax levy. The 3.8 might cover some changes in state aids that might be coming in. As our population increases, sometimes we might get more state aid. There's an expenditure restraint program that's out there, that there's basically a flat pool of money that is available for all municipalities that qualify for it. Fitchburg has historically qualified for that money, but in some years other municipalities do not, so our share of that pool may be a little bit higher. So there's a little bit of variability from the 2.9% in this case for net new construction, but generally speaking it's not very much. So for instance, and I will get to your assessment question, you probably heard a fair amount about the change in shared revenue last year. that cities hadn't had a shared revenue increase from the state in well over 20 years. And there was a new payment that was added, a new shared revenue payment that was provided, and it would have annual increases to it. So that could also, the annual increase could make that 2.9 number creep up slightly. In our case, our adjustment from last year's shared revenue payment to this year was about $25,000 more. So it wasn't obviously a significant increase. And now transitioning to your assessment question, you are correct. The last two revaluations that the city has done in 2022 and 2024 have led to, on average, an about 20% increase in assessed values for residential and commercial properties in the city. Both of them have generally trended right about at 20% each. And for 2022, if my recollection is correct, the last revaluation was pre-COVID, 2018 or 2019, which meant your assessed value remained the same since over that 2 to 3 year period. And then obviously 2022 was an opportunity to assess that property again or revalue it. And we are required by state statute to have property assessed within a certain percentage of fair market value. And as you can imagine, we all know that the housing supply shortage in Dane County is significant, which is thereby driving up the demand for housing, particularly single-family housing. And therefore, our assessments, in order to track with fair market value, obviously are increasing. The 2024 revaluation that was just done this year, there was not a revaluation done in 2023, so assessed values stayed the same in 2023 as they did from 2022. And obviously, in order to, again, recognize the increase in fair market value from 22 to 24, it did lead to, on average, about 20% increase in assessed values, again, both residential and commercial properties. And what's important to distinguish that a 20% increase in assessed value does not equate to a 20% increase in city taxes in particular. If you look at our city taxes over that same time period, roughly the last 4 or 5 years, when looking at it at the average assessed single-family home, they have stayed relatively flat, right around $2,500 a month, $2,500 a year for that average home over that stretch. They have bumped up as high as like $2,600, and I think one year there was actually a small decrease of about $75 in that stretch for just the city portion of taxes. Now we know you get a bill that has 3 other taxing entities. You have the school districts. 2 of the 3 school districts that serve the city of Fitchburg have had recently passed referenda, which is now on tax bills. The 3rd school district has a referenda on the ballot this year. We recognize that. We get that. And there's also the Madison Area Technical College, or Madison College, as the second taxing entity, and then Dane County as the 4th. For instance, Dane County increased their taxes 17% last year. The bottom line is we know it's all coming. You're having to pay that, right? And you pay it to the city, and the city then pays the other taxing jurisdictions' share to them. But the city ends up collecting about a third of what your tax bill generally is to stay in the city and provide city services. And since that has stayed relatively the same, because oftentimes what happens when the assessments go up, the overall value of our property in the community has gone up, and if it's gone up proportionally equal, everyone's share stays basically the same. So then the tax rate declines. So in effect, the increase in your value does not necessarily translate into a corresponding increase in taxes.
There's that video, the tax bill calculation.
Oh, yes, thank you. There is a video on our website probably under finance or assessing.
No, it's on the referendum.
Oh, it's on the, yeah. That talks about what's in a tax bill and how an increase in your assessed value does not necessarily equate to an increase or proportional increase in your property taxes.
I think what is really stinging, and I think you made a very good point, is that it hasn't been that long that Fitchburg caught on to the fact that they realized that a lot of, in our case anyway, in the Verona School District, they realized that they needed to reevaluate the fair market value of a lot of the property in the Verona, at least I know in the Verona School District, a lot of the property had to be brought up to fair market value. And we were really stung with an increase in the reevaluation of a lot of the property, at least our property was. And then the Verona School District built a new high school, and we were really hit with an increase in our property taxes. So now you're coming back with another referendum here. You're going to hit us with another increase in property taxes. So, I mean, this is quite a pill to swallow.
Sure, I can appreciate that. We know school districts have been in the referendum situation for longer than municipalities have. As you know, I think Verona's probably on their third or fourth operating referendum that they've done over the last 10, 12 years, 15 years. This is the first time Fitchburg has done an operating referendum, and again, we recognize that there's a cost to that. The only way in which we can potentially increase the staff capacity that we have and therefore continue to maintain and in some cases enhance services as it relates to staffing, or to improve transit, or to ensure we have the funds available to operate that police services building, it does require a tax increase in order to do those sorts of things. The Common Council did not take this decision lightly, as Mayor Arada had mentioned. As we were, as staff, looking at all of the available options for the Common Council to consider, if we were to fund all those positions, for instance, and other things, we probably would have been looking at a referendum somewhere between $7 and $9 million that would have lasted, let's just say, 7 to 10 years before, or 5 to 10 years before the city may have to come back for a referendum. But the Common Council didn't feel that that was fair to the taxpayer, to levy that money that far in advance, recognizing that people have seen these tax increases between a change in assessed value related to other referendum that have been passed, or increases in the Dane County property tax levy. They recognize that there have been increases elsewhere in the city for its taxpayers outside the relatively flat increases that they've had in the overall city portion of your tax bill. Again, they just didn't feel that that was right to basically levy that money and then sit on it for 5 to 10 years before ultimately utilizing it. They decided, based on all of the factors that have been talked about here in this conversation, that what they believed to be the most appropriate number was the $3.6 million to meet the most pressing needs right now. And again, this decision was not made lightly to go to referendum, recognizing that it is another ask for our taxpayers, knowing that Verona School, Oregon School just had passed referendum last year, and that Madison has one this year.
Chad, can you add how we also came out with that number, because we follow also the...
Oh, sure, yeah, I'll cover that. Thank you. Yep, I'll mention that.
Well, I appreciate the work you do, but I'm a little critical of some of the points you're making, especially about the fire station, and I'm a supporter of the fire station. I'm sorry, of the police station. But I mean to say that in this referendum, there's additional funding for, I don't know what it was, for a janitor or something. Yeah. I mean, why wasn't that budgeted in the original cost of the project initially? I mean, why are you tacking on some additional costs in this referendum for that? Why wasn't that in the basic budget for when the police station was budgeted? Why is that tacked on?
Sure.
Additionally, I wanted to say something about as this gentleman had said about the fire station. It used to be mutual aid between fire departments, and again, I question I don't quite understand what you're talking about, the increase from 9 to 12 to 15 for volunteer firefighters. What's wrong with the volunteer firefighters? I mean, I've been around here long enough to remember when Fitchburg was a full-time fire chief, and we had quite a good volunteer fire department. Of course, we were the town of Fitchburg.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around here long enough to remember when we were the town of Fitchburg. But do we have a lot of volunteer firefighters on the? I know we have a lot of trainees from MATC. Are they paid, or are they strictly just students?
I'll work in reverse order. I'll start with the fire department. So, well, help me remind me if I don't get to all of them. So, in relation to the fire department, volunteer firefighter in the city of Fitchburg does not necessarily exist any longer. You are right that when the fire department was first formed as a township 50 years ago, there was a exclusively volunteer fire department.
Absolutely.
As the city has grown and the need for a more consistent and reliable staffing model has come to play, we've transitioned to having a combination department that has a combination of full-time career employees and part-time, we call them paid on premises. They basically sign up to fill shifts, and they're at the fire station filling those shifts, running those calls. They're filling one of those 4 engine spots or 8 engine spots. They're paid for their time, and over the years, that pay has slowly increased to where it's currently at $12 an hour, and as I mentioned, we're hoping to get that to $15. But the national trend, and this is not unique to Fitchburg, is volunteerism has declined considerably, particularly in the fire service, largely because of the demands.
Liability.
Right, the demands for the calls for service, the personal liability that somebody may face, the expectations for training and certifications, and the fact that people could potentially get injured, and that would then affect their full-time job. So that's all been declining.
To the city.
Right, exactly. So that's the reason why you're seeing a change in the model for fire department staffing and the request for that. Police services building. So that building is not scheduled for completion until 2027. And ultimately, if this referendum doesn't pass, the Common Council will have to identify where those operating costs come from, or potentially delay the project. And ultimately, either the delay or a reduction in services elsewhere or staffing elsewhere could be necessary in order to fully fund that operating cost associated with the police facility. And then to the point of how we arrived at $3.6 million on the referendum. That's what I was trying to cover with the operating costs.
I explained that this one was capital money and this is operational,
Okay.
and we cannot
Sure.
stay in position with debt.
Gotcha. So the building will get built with borrowed money or cash on hand, basically one-time money. To operate the building, hire a custodian, pay the utilities, replace the mechanical systems at whatever point they need to be repaired or replaced, that's operating money. That comes out of the budget. That has to be set aside money every single year for that. So we obviously can't borrow money, a one-time borrow, that's going to fund operations. That is just strictly for capital costs associated with the building. Where the operating money comes in through the referendum allows us to basically operate that facility and staff it with a full-time custodian. And in order to cover those operating costs, if the referendum does not pass, the building may have to be delayed, further complicating and exacerbating existing space needs throughout City Hall and all of the departments that are housed there, or reductions in services or staff would be necessary to come up with that money that's necessary. The dollar amount, how did we arrive at 3.6 million? There was that survey that I had mentioned that had been sent out back in February, I think it was, Again, that was sent out to, I think, just over around 15,000 residential property addresses in the city of Fitchburg. I think we got just over 2,100 responses to that survey. And in that survey, I hope some of you perhaps recall seeing that survey, there were a number of options that were listed in that survey. The option that was listed at $3.6 million, the one you have here, at least the dollar amount, that had support of 48% of the respondents in that survey. And there was a secondary response at $2.9 million that had a total favorability response rate of 56% of the community. So ultimately, that was a large decision in which the council utilized to try to determine what amount might be appropriate to look at the referendum, was based upon the community feedback that was provided through that survey. So in summary, roughly 50% of our community supported 3.6, just under 50% supported a $3.6 million referendum in that survey. Next question, I'll see if anybody else has one before coming back.
Thank you.
Yep.
I don't even remember when I spoke into a microphone last. I want to step back into a statement that you made, Mayor, earlier about the social media and some of my word, misinformation. I'm not sure how you described it. I would like to ask from the old school social media, the newspaper. I'm wondering, I heard about this issue, had an idea about it, then I read the newspaper. I'm here tonight with my husband because I read the newspaper and I was more confused. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to pick two potentially issues that you have identified as misinformation and clarify them for us, please.
Well, I think one of them that can be, whether it's misinformation or not, I mean, I can't speak to all the comments that might be out there in social media in particular. That probably would take me more hours in the day than I would have available, and would certainly take me away from my other duties. We do have folks who are looking at those, but I do think that oftentimes there is a feeling that, as we talked about earlier, that assessed value increases equate to the same corresponding level of a property tax increase, and that is not typically the case. And I think our Common Council has demonstrated that over the last 5 years, where we have seen 2 revaluations done that were very notable increases in assessed value at approximately 20% on average, but yet the city portion of the tax bill stayed basically flat within a small percentage of what it had been before those revaluations were done. I think that's probably one of the big things out there. I don't know if there's another main issue that maybe you've been seeing out there that you would want me to comment or you want to comment on?
Yeah, there are a couple. The other one is all of you received a flyer, okay? A mailer from the city. So we pay the mailer and the consultant with ARPA fund that we got.
TID closure.
TID closure. We
TID closure.
closed 2 successful tax incremental districts. We kept the money for one-time use, and we decided, the previous mayor decided to allocate that money to use for the consultant and pay for the mailer. So the money is not coming from taxpayer money, it's coming for those closure of those tax incremental districts. There was another email, a mailer that you got, that it was from with firefighters, you know what I mean? That one was paid by the firefighter union. It wasn't paid by the city or with taxpayer money. The union, the police union, and the firefighter union are supportive of the referendum, so they are going to reach out to you in different ways. The firefighter are sending mailer, the police, I think, is going to send a letter. So that one is, the other thing is that the City of Fitchburg doesn't have a revenue issue, we have an expenditure issue. And I want to tell you, putting together this 2025 budget, I don't know how much we cut a lot of, fat from the budget, trying to find way to reduce the cost. If you look at what portion of the city tax bill for the last, I would say 5 years, it has been flat. It hasn't increased your taxes at all, maybe like, $20, $30, you know, I mean, according to if we follow the median value of a home. So, so people are trying to make those comments that we are spending more money than we have, and it's not true. You can go and take a look at the 2025 budget. All the numbers are there. The other misinformation is they're saying that we are not transparent with the referendum. We started this process in June 2023 in an open camera. All the meetings that we had and we talked about the referendum were in committee of the whole meetings or common council meetings. The consultants show up, I don't know how many times to those meetings. Everything is posted and public. We sent a survey at the beginning of the year, so everyone knew that we were doing that because we reached out to you. So all of that type of misinformation is in social media, and we need to clarify that. We are trying to do our best here. I am a taxpayer here in the City of Fitchburg too, so I am in the Madison School District too, like a couple of us. So we are going to have a very difficult decision when we go to the ballot on November, 5th. I support public school, always. So I don't know, $600 million is a lot too. But so I want to clarify. I don't know, Gabriela, and you guys have
they
seen.
want something. Yeah. I do just want to, as I'm passing the mic, just kind of clarify when the mayor mentioned as we were putting together the 2025 operating budget, there were reductions made there in a number of operating accounts, not because there was excess, but because of the fact that we needed to get to a balanced budget. And because we strive every year, obviously, and we're required to have a balanced budget, it does not allow us to add the capacity or make the investments that many in our community feel are necessary in order to continue to meet the needs. Just want to reiterate, nearly 75%, two-thirds of our budget is people. 1/3 of the budget provides all the things that those people need: equipment, supplies, gasoline, take your pick, whatever the case may be. The other third is what gets the services done besides the people. Alders?
Just to add to that statement, I think the other piece that is important to understand is, excuse me, just because we run a referendum doesn't mean the city has been irresponsible with your money. I think to go back, being one of 6 municipalities in the entire state to get the Moody's rating that we have was a huge task that city staff, well before I was on council, I can't take any credit for that, accomplished. I think the other thing about people, sir, going back to your statement about the Verona School District increasing, I was on the Verona School Board with the operating referendum, not the building referendum. And that was all about paying teachers' salary. And I think it's just really complex to go back to, right? During all of the COVID years and post-COVID years, the state did not increase a single dollar per student. They didn't give any extra money to all students. So we're sitting here at the school district making up for learning gaps that the state chose not to increase money for. And the only way to do that was to ask taxpayers. And to everybody's point here, it still hurts all of us, right? When we were talking about that, we were saying, well, we need extra tax dollars, but some of our own teachers live in our district. We're taxing the very people we want to pay more, which was really painful to realize. So that's the only other point I wanted to add, is that it's a little more complex, and it doesn't mean the city is not being fiscally responsible with tax dollars.
The other thing I see a lot, and this is really not anyone's fault for not knowing this, because the city budget's incredibly complicated, and I've been on the council, this is my 5th city budget, and I'm finally starting to really fully understand how it works. But, and Chad mentioned this a little while ago, but so not all, the city gets money from more than one source, more than just property taxes. So, but the operating budget, the day-to-day, the 70% that goes to staff, those operating expenses year to year, that's what your property taxes pay for. It's those ongoing expenses. I think sometimes what I hear is people say, why did you waste money on this? Why did you waste money on that? Why didn't you hire staff instead? Well, typically when they say, like, why did you build a park instead of hiring staff? Well, parks are typically built using park fees in lieu of park fees. So basically they're paid by developers, and then we can use that money to build parks. Sometimes we get, someone mentioned the wayfinding signs around the city where it's like, oh, turn here to get to Dolly Park Conservancy. And they said, why did you waste money on that? Well, that was paid for through hotel tax, because we get some hotel tax fees. So like there's just more than one source of money in the budget. And so I've seen that kind of thrown around a lot, and I think that's caused a lot of confusion. And if you look at the mayor's 2025 proposed budget, the first 20 or so pages has so much great information. It's got all these charts that show how things have changed over time. And one of the charts on page 13, I can send you the link if anyone has a hard time finding it. It basically breaks down. It shows the average home assessed value for the last 3 years, and it breaks it down by exactly where that money goes. So how much goes to the municipal court, how much goes to the library, how much goes to police staff, and 70% of that is staffing. And so it actually shows you exactly how many dollars per out of the 2,600 or so dollars to Fitchburg it goes to. And I think that's a really helpful visual for people to really know where their money is going, where that property tax money is going. That's just the thing I wish people knew. And it's hard to know. I don't blame people for not knowing that. It's really difficult. So, yeah.
Thanks. All right. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
So the referendum's calling out several things that are presumably really considered high priority.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that in the short term, if the referendum fails, there won't be any, those things just won't be done. But longer term, presumably those are higher priority than some other things that the city is doing. What do you have examples of things that we would lose as a result of the referendum not passing?
So that list would still need to be identified, and obviously the Common Council has the ultimate decision-making authority on that. But what staff would be looking at in conversation and consultation with the Common Council is we would be looking at, if we were to add these $3.6 million worth of priorities or immediate needs, we would need to see under current legislative regulations probably a corresponding decrease of $3.6 million. The only way that we would add those 14 positions, more than likely, over time, would be to reduce or cut 14 other positions that are currently in the city. I don't know where we would begin to do that, to be honest with you, as somebody who's worked for the city for about 25 years. Our public safety departments, our police and fire departments have roughly 45% of our 200 full-time employees are within those two departments. And when you look at the other departments that are listed, human resources, finance, and communications in there, or the fact that they touch other departments. For instance, the finance position is taking work off of engineering and public works. And the communications position would take work off of a bunch of different people who are spreading that out across their duties. It becomes increasingly difficult to say, well, where would we completely eliminate 14 positions from? And most of our departments probably have anywhere on average, probably 4 or 5 people in them, in some cases. Our parks maintenance has 6 people in it. So in order to cut 14 positions, if you looked at park maintenance, there's 6 positions. Our senior center has 5. I mean, there's 11, but that would be two functions completely eliminated from our city, and I'm not sure our city residents would support that kind of cut, to be honest with you. So because we can't add the capacity that we need or enhance other services, referendum is our only option at this point in time, or most likely option. There could be, other ways in which some revenue could be generated, not to the tune of $3.6 million. And there's not $3.6 million in reductions in the other 1/3 of the budget to equate to that either. So what you would see is a reduction in staff. What those would be at this point in time, I don't know. And that would have a corresponding decrease in city services or elimination of some. So that would still need to be determined. And I don't think, because we're not trying to close a deficit in this budget, I think it's an important difference in that we don't necessarily have to say to our public at this point in time that X, Y, and Z would be cut or reduced as some measure of And, you know, some might view that as kind of like, oh, we're trying to scare people into what's going to happen, right? But the honest answer is we don't know. We're okay for 25. The mayor has put together a budget that balances. It doesn't add anything on this list at all. So we'll be okay for 2025, but it's the years behind, you know, 26 and beyond that the difficult decisions are going to have to be made if the referendum doesn't pass at some point. So, Richard, do you have a question?
Thank you. This is sort of a statement, and then I'll follow it up with a question. But I served 12 years on the council, all of them on Finance Committee, every single, plus a bunch of other committees. And I actually voted for one of the largest tax increases at Fitchburg. And that's when we switched from the fire department, from volunteer and some paid on call to career staff. And that was a function of it needed to be done. The run times were long. Your homeowner's insurance was going to go through the roof if the insurance people ever got totally wind of what the run times were being. But I'm struggling with this one. I'm struggling voting yes on this thing. And that's what you showed the average cost of a $400 and some odd thousand Fitchburg home, but a huge amount of the housing stock in this city is apartments. And every single council member seems that the last couple elections, what you wanted to do is figure out how to get affordable housing into the city. You created a housing committee or a housing something or other, but no one's ever said, what's it going to do to somebody that's already, you know, paycheck to paycheck, so to speak? What's going to happen to apartment rents in Fitchburg, especially for, you know, maybe the not so great income or whatever? Those landlords are all going to raise it, and now we've just created the problem even more. And sometimes I think, you know, we've lost sight as a council, quite frankly, as to what's important in Fitchburg. You know, we've tried to be, in my opinion, too many things to too many people, and that's come at a cost. And plowing the streets, making sure the parks are there, police and fire for safety, and the other things we do, but, you know, I'm struggling. I haven't 100% made up my mind yet, but I'm leaning towards voting no on this thing. And I guess in a roundabout fashion, and the council got people can answer it, and the mayor if they want, but if this 3-point whatever referendum doesn't pass, and it's a forever deal, you know, we all know that. You can add 3-point whatever to the budget every single year. You know, are you going to come back in a year and say, give us 1.8, give us 2? Has that been discussed? But I think maybe, you know, how much of what the county does on social programs is Fitchburg trying to copy at the moment? And not that that's not a need and a benefit for the city, but I look at the budget, watch the meetings, and you created a structural deficit especially on the 3 proposed police people for the cops, because in the 4th year, you know, you're going to put them on the payroll or let them go, which won't happen. So, and to me, the $400 and some thousand for the police maintenance thing is a backdoor way to get the police facility in, because if you voted in the capital improvement plan for a police station, there's an operating cost that goes with it, and it's supposed to be shown on the CIP. And, you know, somebody else said, why wasn't it budgeted? You know, this seems to me a way to get that as a backdoor onto the budget under the 3-point whatever. And I don't know. I'm quite frankly, I still follow Fitchburg finances, and this thing's got me baffled as to how we got here, quite frankly.
Can I explain?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the other thing I want to explain, Richard, maybe you understand that, in 2011, the formula for the levy limit was totally different. we have a base, 2-3% plus the net new construction, okay? So with that base, we were able, as a municipality, to cover, inflation, the existing services. Then, on the net new construction, we use it for growth, absorb growth. If we need to hire an extra police officer or firefighter or park maintenance, we use that net new construction. What happened in 2011, the governor at that time decided to remove the base. So all the municipalities in Wisconsin, we have to deal with the net new construction. I want to give you an example. Our best year in the city was, 2022, when we got 4.5.
I think there was a 5% in like 17 or 18.
Yeah, and the average inflation for that year in this country was almost 8.4. So that incredible year that we got, inflation took it up, and even more, okay? So, so this is the thing that we need to look, when we talk about how this levy limit cap is practically strangled all our municipalities.
Are you still trying to do expenditure restraint money?
Yeah, we are doing, and we keep every year we're doing. In my budget for 25 is there, okay? We don't touch it. That one for us is like sacred, okay? We maintain that. We have maintained that in the last 4 or 5 budgets. So that one is happening in the last 10 years. This is what everything you see in all the municipality, town, village are going to referendum because time is catching up. And also the state has, $4 billion in surplus, $4 billion there is in the state, okay? And that money is retained there. They don't want to move it down to municipality, to a school district, and it's our money. It's our income tax money, it's our sales tax money that the state has $4 billion surplus. And I think if something happened in November 5th and it changed the composition in the Capitol, maybe that in the future there's going to be another type of conversation that say, okay, let's open that, move the money down to municipality, to a school district. It's going to be time, but it's going to take at least 2 or 3 year cycles to do that. But so this is what we say. We didn't take this lightly to ask you for this money. We know, but we are in a city that we are growing. We grew 34% of our population in 10 years. We are growing. We are in a great place to live. The Madison region is growing. Dane County is growing. So people want to live in our city. We have a great quality of life. And, we provide great services, if you look, I look at my tax bill. I pay $7,000 in the total for my house. The city portion is $2,700. So I divided that by 12, it's 200 something per month, $51 a week. I am paying for all these great services that I have in the city. So this is how I see it. I try to look the positive part of this, but I understand. I understand that some of you will say, "No way," say, "No, I get it, and I respect your position."
Thank you, Mayor. Do you want to add? You want to go? Okay. Anybody else have a question at all? Okay. Go ahead.
Even though I sound negative, I'm probably going to vote for this. But I do have some questions because I'd like to think that we're all getting good use of the money we do spend. So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to make a comment. Question has to do with, you want to get a full-time custodian. Whatever committee, department decided that, did they look at just hiring a commercial cleaner and maybe an on-call maintenance firm, or they wouldn't have to pay health insurance, retirement contributions, et cetera. So were they really thorough before deciding we need a full-time person? Now, as far as good use of money, I'll give you a really bad example. I play pickleball. I don't know if it's the recreation department's fault, but they had a great place in McGaw Park to put in a pickleball court, and they did, but they didn't listen to people that know something about pickleball. They didn't make the fences high enough and in the ground low enough so that they could put on windbreaks. And it's very hard to play pickleball in 30-mile-an-hour winds when they just totally blew it, basically. So they didn't do their homework in that particular case. So I'm hoping that that's an isolated example of some of the things that Fitchburg does, but that was a bad example.
I'll comment on the pickleball courts real briefly. And you're right, we could have done better on those. We've learned a lot of things with those courts that we didn't know, and we maybe should have known before we did it. Yep, I agree. And I was coming into this role about the time those courts were opened and learned a lot of things that we could have done differently through that situation. And it's our hope that as we do an expansion of those courts, that we're going to do it much better the next time around by utilizing a firm that specializes in the construction and design of pickleball courts, because we didn't do that the last time. And your comments are fair, and we'll look to do better in the future with that particular amenity that's in our park system. And when you look at the custodian, maintenance person, yes, we have looked at the potential for outsourcing that. One of the challenges when you're talking about a police department in particular is the amount of confidential information that is in a police department. And oftentimes it can be a challenge to outsource that because of the specific requirements that we have, not only at our own local level, but both the state and federal level with the stringent requirements to keep the information that we are provided. When you're thinking criminal histories, driver's license records, those sorts of things, we have a duty to keep those confidential. And we have a better ability to keep that confidential when it's our own employee who we can do a background investigation on and have much more ability to hold them accountable for that confidentiality. Yeah, yep, so, but thank you for the questions. Yeah. Richard?
When you show the increase in runs and the increase in police calls, what's missing from this is taking over the town of Madison property. So, and I know that it was talked about that taking over the town of Madison, that piece that Fitchburg absorbed was going to cost the city money and both staff and that. Did we get, as a city, any of the town of Madison employees that came over to Fitchburg in how they ran their police and fire and any of that? And, you know, so how does that factor into the slide when it shows for extra runs and calls and the increase in population? Part of that increase in population has to be just from absorbing the town of Madison. And I don't know what the population was when it was absorbed.
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, the data was pulling 2013 to 2022. Does that sound right? Yeah. The town of Madison was attached in October 30th of 2022. So the data that was pulled, if my recollection is correct, and I'll go back just to confirm, I don't know as though that data was actually included in this here. Let me just confirm. 2022 it looks like. Yep, 2013 to 2022 on the fire side. And on the police side, same time period, 2013 to 2022. So that does not factor into the call for service. It's a fair question. Regarding staffing, all town of Madison employees were eligible to apply for positions within the city of Fitchburg. I was going to say, it was maybe, yeah, there's for sure one police officer that was hired, and there might be one other position that was filled with a town employee. But that obviously, that Town of Madison attachment was a decision made by the three municipalities, the Town of Madison, the City of Madison, the City of Fitchburg, as you know, in 2002. It was a 20-year agreement to dissolve the town and attach 2/3 of it, or 3/4 of it actually, to the City of Madison, and 1/4 of it to the City of Fitchburg. And has that led to an increase in need for service? Yeah, it has.
We had an adjustment, you remember, a levy adjustment for the 2023 budget.
Yeah.
But it was very, very small. We used that to hire 2 additional police officers for that area, because we absorbed 1,500 people, you know what I mean? But that one was a very small adjustment to the levy when we absorbed the town.
Yeah, in effect, that's considered at the Department of Revenue a transfer of services, that the town transferred services to us, so we did end up getting a corresponding levy increase. Not enough, I mean, let's be honest, but it wasn't enough.
And I mean, even like outside of, like, I think especially with the police, like even before annexing that part of Madison, like the police had outgrown like the space that they were in. So they were gonna need this, like regardless if that happened or not. So I just wanna like incorporate that piece into the conversation as well. And in terms of like the housing thing, I mean, that's like a national issue that we're trying to tackle, and not specifically exclusive to Fitchburg. But I think the council has been trying to come up with different types of housing that can increase the representation of it, which will increase, at some point, it'll level off and decrease the price. And so, I mean, I've heard like some things on social media, I'm not saying anybody in this room said it, but like Fitchburg, like we're building because irresponsibly because we're in a deficit and we're trying to make up some money and things like that. And that's not the case at all. Like I think we're being strategic about where we build, how we build, and what we build to not only adhere to what the current residents want, but other individuals who may be moving to the city of Fitchburg and meet some of the needs that they have, and keep in mind the difference in income requirements that individuals may have. So I think that's kind of where we've been going and what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Any other questions? I know I want to be respectful of time this evening. Oh, did you have something? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Patrick.
If Gabriel wants to say something.
Go ahead. I'll come back.
This is going to take a bit.
You've been warned. I'll take it back.
I just did want to speak to something about the mention of a structural deficit. So the COPS grant that we received from the Justice Department, we did not actually accept it yet. Because it would create a structural deficit if we accepted it, which is why we're hoping for the budget referendum. If it does pass, we're able to hire those officers. We could hire them now because technically we have the money for it, but we know that it would create a structural deficit without the plan, and because we can't choose to raise the levy without that. And also, I've been on the Finance Committee for 5 years now, and it's been a blast, and I would love to sit down with you and see what you think we can cut. And I'm being absolutely, honest with that. If people think they have ideas for where we could cut, I would love to see what people would have to say, because I have looked at this budget deeply. I think everything that is in the operating budget that is actually the property taxes are paying for is a need. I really think it is, and I would love to hear. I mean, I assume that there might be some divergence of opinion, but I would love to see what people would think to cut, because I don't see anything. And I do deeply. I am concerned about the rising costs for people. That keeps me up at night. It absolutely does. It's one of the reasons why housing is so important, because if we're not creating housing, prices will just continue to go up and up and up and up. But that's a separate issue. But yes, I worry about the cost, absolutely. And but ultimately the way I see it is I think the City of Fitchburg has done its best to steward its resources and to prevent any sort of irresponsible spending, like creating structural deficits, hiring staff that we know we can't fund long term. And this is really the choice I see, is that if the taxpayers want more services, which the city would like to provide, this is the way that we see to go about doing it. So, but I welcome ideas. I truly do.
Thank you. All right, Patrick, there you go.
Okay, I have a multi-part question with a main question, and I always want to establish my facts before I get to there. And I thought of this after the last meeting, that's why I'm back. So, what I asked at the last meeting, just to cover that, is that could you go to the referendum question just for the point? We have the main budget before we even think about this referendum question. And the main budget is within the expenditure restraint limit, which means we qualify for the state's reward grant revenue sharing thing that we get. So that was good to hear. Now, on top of that main regular normal budget, we're adding the $3.6 million here if the referendum passes. We also have some money borrowed right now. I don't know what it is, 10 million, 20 million, some 12? Just regular borrowing right now that we have right now. We have some amount in borrowing? Okay, I don't know what the number is. And then we are also going to build the police station starting in 2025, and the 40 million for that is going into borrowing. So, what I remember that I heard in a previous conversation, and tell me if this is correct, is the payments to pay for the money that we have borrowed, the loan payments, is that exempt from the expenditure restraint limit?
It's exempt from the levy limit. Any debt is exempt from the levy limit conversation, and that it's my understanding, and I would encourage you to contact our finance director for further clarification, that the expenditure restraint is based upon our allowable levy limit, whether or not we qualify that.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, the state
that's
has...
the same as what I'm saying.
The state has exempted debt payments from levy limit calculations, which in reality actually encourages municipalities to make poor financial decisions. Because if they were to transition all of their projects, all of their equipment purchases to borrowing, in effect, they could raise, they would have available levy to say, add some staff, not to the extent we need to staff, but it's also increasing the cost of the taxpayer because now instead of paying cash on hand for that piece of equipment, you know, a $200,000 snowplow, for instance, you're now borrowing that money and paying interest on that and having the debt and carrying costs. And one thing that I think has contributed to this AAA bond rating that we've had is our staff and Common Council have adopted a practice over the last 10 years that we actually have equipment replacement accounts. So, for instance, the police department, if they have 25 police cars in their fleet, there's an estimated useful life identified for each of those cars based upon what it's assigned to, whether it's patrol, investigations, or administration, or whatever. And we take the estimated cost. If it's $75,000 to buy a SUV and put all the equipment in that car, and that car is going to last us for 5 years, then we're setting aside, in that case, $15,000 a year, every year for that car and every other car. And that money is now sitting there and available so that once that car needs to be replaced, the cash is on hand, we go ahead and buy that car, and we don't borrow for that car. We do the same thing for our snowplows and the vast majority of our equipment. There are some exceptions, $1 million fire engines.
No, it's not $1 million. Now it's
That's true. Inflation has pushed that up, and the wait time is now 50 months. I mean, we just literally ordered a fire truck earlier this year, and we were told it'll be here in 50 months, a little over 4 years. So we try to do it, responsibly that way as well.
In other words, as you're saying, bad city management, not us, would just load everything into borrowing, and then the payments to cover that, to pay for that borrowing would be exempt from the expenditure restraint limit, the levy limit, I think that's the same thing, and the taxes would be way up there. So what I'm thinking here in the entire picture is we have the regular budget. On top of that, we could have the referendum, $3.6 million if this passes, and on our tax bills for the city portion only, we also will have whatever the payments are to cover the current amount of borrowing, whatever that number is.
What is included in the budget?
Well, that's what I'm kind of wondering. And then the police station, 40 million goes on borrowing, so that would also be added onto the borrowing, that will be in our tax payments. Now, I know Ellers and Associates has said that our borrowing level is good and comfortable and everything is good like that. But is that the total picture of the regular budget plus the referendum plus the payments to the current amount of borrowing plus the payments to the $40 million police headquarters?
So the dollars that we've been talking today have been related strictly to the referendum. If the referendum passes, just looking at the average single-family home at $457, we'd be looking at just under $300 increase in property taxes.
And we're ignoring the MATC school district.
Sure, right, exactly.
Let's talk about this. But even just within the city, it's, I think, this is why I'm trying to get to this. We have multiple payments that go into our city portion of the property tax.
You need to take a look at page 13 of the budget. You will see the table and everything is there.
See, that's what I'm trying to do. Is the whole payments in the budget?
Yeah, everything is included.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So we have borrowed approximately 20% of the cost for the police services facility at this point in time, about $8 million. And as I mentioned earlier, we estimated, Ellers, our public finance advisory firm, estimated that we are saving about $300,000 in interest costs because of the city's AAA bond rating on that $8 million borrowing. That $8 million debt service payment is included in the mayor's proposed budget that was released back in September. That proposed budget has about it's a 3.4% increase in 3.3% increase, and I think inflation in the last 12-month period has been 3.1%. So it's very close to what's been trending for the last 12 months of inflation. That has, again, about 25% of the borrowing costs in it. The average single-family home would see about approximately an $85 increase with that budget if it's passed by Common Council next month. When we're looking at the other borrowing associated with the police services facility, it's a little bit difficult right now to determine exactly how much we'll borrow because we don't have the final schematic design and we don't have the final cost estimate and we don't have the bids, obviously. The bidding process is likely to take place late next summer, which will obviously allow us to get a much more firm idea on how much it's cost. Right now, it's $35 million for the facility and up to $5 million to add sustainability features such as solar, geothermal, enhanced insulating windows, building envelope, LED lighting, low flow fixtures, those sorts of things could be considered there. We may be able to use some cash on hand to pay a portion of that cost associated with the facility. To what extent, I don't know. We'll work with our finance director to see what cash on hand might be able to use to offset the amount that we borrow. We have been working with our financial advisor to determine what might an appropriate impact fee be for this facility to be charged to new development. We already have an impact fee for our 2 fire stations that were built in, I think, 2017, 2018. So any new development project, whether it's a single-family house or a multi-story multifamily building, has an impact fee added on to the building permitting process that's used to pay down the debt associated with the 2 fire stations. We're currently in the process of exploring implementing a similar impact fee related to the police services facility. That could also impact how much we ultimately have to borrow or how fast we potentially repay the borrowing as well. So, but the bottom line is we've already borrowed 20%. You will see that in the upcoming tax bill. Anybody else have a question? I know
on that.
Okay.
So what you're saying is the borrowing is not over and above and exempt from the expenditure restraint levy limit. It's in the budget. And when we have a police station added onto borrowing, that'll be in the budget. So then kind of generally, how does it look at this point to be adding another $40 million onto borrowing that we also have to make payments on? How does that affect future budgets? Is that gonna, well, if we have to start, make a huge payment, included it in the budget, included it in the expenditure restraint limit in the future, doesn't that mean that Other things are budgetary or less money for everything else. Still stay within that limit.
So it's a little bit of a complicating factor because, one, again, we don't know how much we're going to borrow. We don't know what the rate at which we'll be borrowing that money because we don't get the rate until, right? We basically, when we borrow money, we put it out for bid, so to speak. And I think we had 6 bids on that $8 million. And basically, because we have that AAA, it creates that competition for our bonds, so to speak, or notes, depending. There was a recent change, and I think we're transitioning away from bonds to notes. But ultimately, we don't know what the rate will be. So we don't truly know what the impact is going to be yet on future operating budgets, and we also don't know what our net new construction will be in future years. That has to be determined. We don't know what, if any, state aid will change in future years. We are told that every 2 years, the state will recalculate the supplemental shared revenue payment that was added last year. Could it increase? Hopefully. I don't know how notable it will. I mean, we saw a $25,000 increase from last year to this year, so it wasn't significant. So there's too many unknowns for me to comment on that, and I don't want to give bad information.
Those questions are for Misty.
It's still going to be a marginal only at the end of the year.
Of course it will. Yeah, it will. Absolutely. Any other questions? I appreciate it. Looks like we got one more, and then we'll let you diehards go. How's that sound?
Completely simple one.
Yeah.
What was the calendar date that the police station construction was authorized, approved, I guess?
Can you mention also that we decreased $10 million?
Yeah, so the short answer is during the last capital improvement plan adoption, which was in July, that's when the budget was adjusted for that project to $40 million. That is $15 million, I think, higher than what had been budgeted in 2020 or 2019. Yeah. There was a 2020 was $25 million was allocated for the facility. Due to obviously construction costs and other associated costs, the estimated cost of that facility is now between $35 and $40 million.
This year, then, July?
Yes, that's when the budget was most recently adopted. And then, of course, cost estimates will continue to come in up until the time it goes out for bid later next year.
But the original price for that police facility was $50 million, and council in favor decided to go to 35. So we reduced it. That one was another one. So we say $50 million.
We are 2 hours in. I am going to let the rest of you go who obviously stuck around. I will just leave you with one last slide if you are interested, and it is also on the card here. If you want to stay connected with the city, there are a variety of ways in which you can sign up for notifications or other information. And I encourage you to grab a card as you leave and use your phone to look at the QR code and see all the ways that you can potentially do that. So if you do have any questions, I will also put up my contact information here. You can see my email address, chad.brecklin@fitchburgwi.gov, or my phone number, 270-4208. Feel free to call me with any questions that you may have. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.